Aloha namaste. Welcome into a process to help us sit with uncomfortable feelings, discomfort. There's a huge need for this process, this ability to sit with something that's uncomfortable and be able to navigate it in a healthy way. Because most of us were not taught emotional intelligence, awareness of negative emotions, how to process them, how to understand them, how to not let them control us and become a massive reaction. And so we have two major coping mechanisms that we see in society. And most of us were taught one of these coping mechanisms, at least, if not both of them, from a parent or from society, friends, conditioning, something like that. So most of us, we just weren't shown. So my goal of sharing this process is to give you kind of a formula to go through how to sit with uncomfortable feelings, how to sit with uncomfortable energies and emotions that sometimes are caused by you and sometimes they're not. Sometimes you just don't feel good, or maybe someone else said something or did something that makes you feel off, or something's happening in the world and it's making you feel off. So there's various reasons as to why, and we'll get into that. But I want to go over the two main coping reasons or coping mechanisms that we do that is a way for the ego to subconsciously offset this discomfort. So the typical patterns that most of us were taught is an uncomfortable emotion and situation arises. It's uncomfortable. And because of that discomfort, the ego does two things. Well, one of two things, or both, I guess. But the first is it masks it. So it just says, get me out of this discomfort, give me some instant gratification, and fill me with something positive. This is entertainment, alcohol, pornography, drugs, sex, some sort of experience, money, shopping, something, right? So this is some sort of external mask. And what it's doing is saying, okay, this is uncomfortable, get me into comfort and put me back in equilibrium. Now, of course, I don't want to look at the discomfort or do anything with it. I just want to get back into comfort. So nothing gets healed, and this only hurts us because all we do is mask it. We're just putting a Band-Aid over it. And this is a huge pattern that we see in society. It's in media, it's in movies and things like that. It's constantly depicted, kind of conditioning into this is what you do, this is normal. And our parents are our first usual role models of this. Is when they are uncomfortable, we witness how they self-soothe. And it's usually in a way of masking with some sort of experience or substance. Okay, so the second way is we project it onto someone else. So again, the discomfort's there, the subconscious and the ego is like freaking out, like, I don't want to feel this way. I'll give it to this. Okay, and a lot of us went through this too, where a parent or a friend or something, a teacher, mentor, a religion, something like that, someone taught us when you are uncomfortable, you give it to someone else. So the simplified version of this back when we're kids is like, so the bully's insecure, they then take that insecurity out on someone else. They make that person feel insecure. Our parents are stressed and they punish us and like yell at us and take that stress out on us. Our parents are going through their own discomfort and their own pressures, and they make us feel bad for existing, essentially. One that comes to mind is maybe they're going through financial stress, and we as the child maybe want something or something like that, and it's like we get attacked for wanting that. We are made somehow a source of like burden, right? So we get taught that we're like a burden or something like that. Okay, endless ways that plays out. But we have two core categories. It's either mask or project it. Now, it's also not just onto people. We can also take all that discomfort, and the ego can project it onto a thing or a concept too. Anything it can do to displace the feeling. So it can blame the system, it can blame politics, it can blame God, it can blame the world, it can blame anything under the sun. And that's another form of how it can displace the energy. And it's a way for it to get the energy out. It doesn't want to face it. Now, both mechanisms don't lead to healing or anything productive, and the feeling will just keep coming back, because what this process is going to help us see is the feeling itself is not the problem. The feeling itself isn't even the thing that's the most uncomfortable. It's kind of an ironic thing. The pain, or like the suffering from it, I guess would be the word, really the clearest word for it. It's like the suffering that comes from it isn't the feeling itself. The suffering is the confusion, resistance, and the inability to look at it. That's what's causing the suffering. So the feeling itself comes up, the ego doesn't know what to do with it, and it just avoids it. Now that feeling is going to keep coming up because it's trying to communicate something that's unreconciled and unhealed. A huge example of this is we have a trauma, makes us super uncomfortable, that we're not ever looking at. And so we just keep masking it, right? We see this in the total classic stereotype in the healing journey of someone's gone through something really intense, like all of us probably have, like pretty much everybody has some form of something that they've gone through. But let's take, a really big classic example of, so someone's been deeply abused or traumatized, and now they're just like, they become an alcoholic or something because they're just trying to cope with how deep down they have all this baggage that they have no idea how to deal with, so they just drink to drown it out, right? This is like a huge one we're all so familiar with, this stereotype. When we look in humanity, we will start to see patterns like that. There's a reason why it's a stereotype, is because it's actually a textbook strategy for the ego to cope. It's really cool because this stuff is actually very predictable, and once you realize how the psyche works, it's very empowering. That's the cool part. Because once you start to see it, you get to take all that power back and find a healthier way to deal with what it really is trying to do, which is alleviate us. It's what it's really trying to do. But it's not in the long run, because the masking one just hurts us further and causes probably more damage in the long run, because it's hurting us and keeping us trapped longer and longer. It's also indirectly hurting others in the process. The other one's clearly directly hurting others and indirectly hurting us, because we're not healing, we're not masking, we're never truly dealing with it ourselves, we're always avoiding it. So in both cases, the ego, as I always go over, it's just a mechanism of familiarity, and we have to see it as just a neutral mechanism. It's not like an entity in and of itself. It's just trying to, at its core, trying to protect us, trying to take care of us, trying to somehow alleviate our suffering. But the irony is, it always gets the opposite of what it thinks it's going to get us. So it thinks, oh, I got you, let's just go get wasted, man. And it's like, you'll feel better. It's like, no, I won't feel better, because in the long run, that's worse. And typically how it operates is, especially with these two particular things, is it promises instant reward, instant gratification, but long-term delayed suffering. So that's the mechanism to kind of be aware of. That's always how it operates. It has a promise, it never delivers. Its promise is usually hinged upon instant results, long-term failure, I guess you could word it. So, or long-term suffering. Every single time, every single one you examine, every time we look at an ego pattern or behavior, we will see the same consistent pattern. It's textbook. So it doesn't matter whether it's alcohol, it doesn't matter what the masking was, it's all the same. It doesn't matter what the displacement was, it's all the same. It's all the same ego. It's all the same mechanism. So, cutting that, getting to the root of it, the heart of this is the ego is trying to alleviate our suffering, but it doesn't have the means to do that, because it's not something the ego is here to solve. Topics of happiness, fulfillment, and suffering, those types of things, That's not the ego's domain. The ego's domain is to feed us and to keep the physical body alive. So eat, drink, and sleep. Like, eat food, drink water, and sleep, and get rest. Like, that is its world. It's connected to the primal animal humanness of us. It's the reptilian brain. It's the fight or flight mechanism. It's totally primitive, and it's not concerned with the topics of thriving and happiness and fulfillment. That is not its domain. So it's never gonna have the tools necessary to actually help us with things such as peace and contentment and happiness and fulfillment and all these things that we all as humans truly crave, because we are beyond the animal nature. And so we crave that at our core, but we don't know how to get it because the ego is a horrible guide and never seems to get us there. So it's very disheartening until we transcend it. So whatever your mechanism is, first we want to identify that. And probably you've done both your whole life, but you might have one that you've leaned towards more than the other. And you might notice that there's different chapters where certain ones were more applicable. So I know that I used the masking one for many, many years, like a decade or more, totally. And that's when, you know, addiction comes into play and you're just constantly, anytime you feel uncomfortable, go to your thing, whatever that is. And then what was interesting in my journey especially is when I took those away, then I went to the other one and then started attacking. So this is something to be mindful of too, is in the healing journey, you take away one, it might offset with the other, and the ego goes, okay, well fine, well I'll try this then. So you gotta be mindful, identify both, identify how you've done each of them, and just take note. Now notice, it's not that you've done it, it's just you're taking observation of, wow, like how interesting, this mechanism of my human psyche is actually extremely predictable. And it's been doing this for a long time. So first step is we just see that. And the reason to do that is just to become aware of the pattern. It's not ever to build any shame or guilt around it or condemn it. It's just to be like, interesting. Okay, interesting. I see how my ego thinks it helps me when it tells me to go do that. I see what it thinks it's getting, but I also am feeling and experience the long-term effects of that. And usually that gets bad enough, or shall we say uncomfortable enough, that eventually we go, dude, I gotta find a different way. Like, this isn't working. And so here we are. Okay, so how do we do this instead? So backtracking, we identify the patterns and see these two. We see which one we kind of lean to at this point in our life, and we just be super aware of it. So the point of identifying it is awareness. Because once you're aware of your strategy, your ego's strategy, you're on to it. So the whole goal of healing and finding true freedom and lasting happiness in life is about transcending the ego. It's not about destroying it or getting rid of it, because it's part of being human. It's part of this thing. It's just like saying, I'm going to transcend my heartbeat. And it's like, well, don't stop your heart. Just, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's part of the mechanism. Don't try to stop breathing. You can master your breath all you want, but you know what I mean? Like, let the body be the body and let the mind be the mind. Transcend them. So the ego is going to do its thing. Okay, it's going to do this. What we're going to do instead, though, is observe and transcend, and therefore reclaim our power to do something different. So the discomfort arises. So there's going to be two things. We're going to rehearse one and kind of walk through one to feel it, because you can always do these in retrospect. But most importantly, it's going to really be solidified when it's raw and in the moment. That's when it really counts, because that's when you're going to actually get to create a new neural pathway and a new way of experiencing your life. However, the mind doesn't know the difference between past and future and present. So everything's now to the mind, in a sense. So whatever we process, even if you're processing a past one, it's still effective at reprogramming the mind, because the mind doesn't know the difference. The subconscious, it just takes whatever is. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up a discomfort. If you have one currently that's like lurking under the surface, that's good. Let's work through it. Let's go ahead and apply this process to it right now. If you don't have one currently, that's wonderful. Think of a past one perhaps, and then just see how you could apply this. And then in the future, when something does come up, inevitably as it will, you'll be locked and loaded, ready to go. And so whatever that is for you, you're reflecting on a past one, or whether you've got one currently that you can kind of work with. It's maybe not super strong, but it is there. It's not, you're not literally in it maybe, but it is there. Go ahead and bring it forth. Just kind of take a moment. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do first awareness. So when we have discomfort, a lot of times we're going to build from the ground up here. A lot of times why we don't know how to do this is because we don't even know we are uncomfortable. So how we check in with this is think of the situation or event that you know is tied to it. Now this is a little like slightly advanced because we're at least aware enough to dig up like, well, I do know there's some discomfort in this thing, okay? A lot of times people won't even know how to do that. We just have to experience it and then we're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable right now. So this already is proving your level of awareness. The fact that you can be like, yes, I do know that my relationship, oh, I have these feelings that come up, or my finances, or my career, or my self-esteem, or whatever. So pick that topic, whatever it is, where you know there's a little something there, or maybe a big something, and just ponder it for a minute. We're going to do this. The caveat here is we're doing this safely, and we're going to constructively work through it. So you're safe to bring it up because we don't want to get lost in it. We want to learn how to healthily process and go through this. We are going to process a discomfort and a negative emotion in a way that we were never taught how. And that's okay. So let it be there. I have one in particular that's coming up today that I'm going to work with. And we're going to work through this. So just take a moment, just feel it. Now here's the first level of awareness. So you have the discomfort. I always reiterate, take a deep breath. Whenever you're getting triggered in life, whenever there's something uncomfortable, just take a deep breath to cue in and remind yourself that you are allowed to pause, become aware, and observe. And even if you're talking with someone, if you're in the middle of something, you're allowed to pause and be like, hold on, there's so much coming up inside of me, let me process. No one's gonna be like, no, I want you to react. I want you to just be like, destructive right now. Come on, react. Like, no one's gonna say that. So even if you're in the middle of a conversation, you're having so much bubble up, just be like, hold on, deep breath, and just say, hold on, I got so much coming up inside of me, I'm trying not to make this worse. And they're gonna be like, oh, okay, interesting. And they might, have their own stuff, but most likely the person's gonna let you breathe. So just breathe, process, notice, become aware. So here's how we develop our awareness. First, we start with the physical, because it's the most obvious layer. All right, so we check in, how does this discomfort feel? How is it showing up? Tightness in the chest, tightness in the shoulders, gripping of the hands, tightness in the body, tension. Knots in the stomach, that's a common one. Chest feeling tight and closed, palms sweaty, heart racing, feeling like the blood's leaving, like you're gonna faint, like blood's draining out of the face type of feeling. Deep breaths, deep breaths. We're safe, we're just gonna process through this, observing how it shows up in the body. Okay, so mine's like a hollowness, because mine's based in, well, I'm gonna get there in a second. So I'm just gonna say, okay, so my body, I'm feeling like an emptiness in my stomach, like the wind's knocked out of me type of feeling. So notice, physical cue. So we're checking in with the physical layer first. This is how you can develop sharper and sharper awareness, is first the physical. So take a moment and sense into that. Wow, what is happening? Identify that. Next, we say, now what is that about? What is that telling me about? Kind of a basic way to just really cut to it is just be like, why? Why is my stomach feeling hollowed out? Like, why is it feeling like light and like the wind's knocked out of me? Like, what's going on? Because I'm afraid of something. Now this is going to help you identify the emotional state. So the physical cue is going to then trigger the emotional check-in. So you're like, okay, I have this physical cue, but what is going on with it? Why? Okay, like why are my palms sweaty? What is going on? What is that? What is it connected to? Why are my shoulders so tense? What's going on there? What's that tension trying to tell me? And by giving yourself the opportunity to ask that, usually it should be pretty easy to extract an emotion behind it. So like for me, if my stomach's in a knot, it's because I'm anxious. It's because I got a fear. So for me, one of mine is, it's a fear. I have a fear that's coming up. It's making me uncomfortable. But it could be anything. It could be sadness. It could be depression. It can be anxiety. It can be desire. It can be like an addiction, a craving. It can be an anger. It can be a haughtiness, an anger, like an arrogance, a pride. It can be a hopelessness. Okay, so it could be a shame. It could be a guilt. What is it? Just attach it to an emotion. Okay, keep breathing. You're safe. You're just observing. It's not you. You're just observing the experience. It's just an experience. It's coming up. We're going to work through it. It's just a wave of an experience. It's coming up, and we're going to process it. So we have this discomfort. It's okay though. We're in it together. We're just watching it. It's registering in a physical way. It's now registering in an emotional way. And now we say, okay, now what is that about? What's that fear about? What's going on there? Tell me more about that fear. Tell me more about that sadness. Why is it there? Why are you afraid? Why? So we're adding now the spiritual layer. This is the more philosophical, conceptual layer of like, okay, so there's a fear, I'm afraid, but of what? Of what is going on? I'm sad, but why am I sad? Tell me, what's the story with that sadness? This is where we get into the spiritual layer. And the spiritual layer is the story. This is the consciousness part. This is the deepest level of it. It's where it's truly originating. The discomfort always traces back to this deepest layer of what does it mean to us. It's another way of saying what's the spiritual root of it. So to give my example, I've got this hollowness in the stomach, this like emptiness. Why? Because I'm afraid. It's like the blood is like, like I'm like ready to fight or flight, right? So the blood's going to my extremities. I'm ready. So my core is feeling like, all right? So that's physical. Why? Because I'm afraid. There's a fear. What is the fear about? What's the deeper story there? Because for me, it's like a fear of missing out. I feel like I have this big fear of missing out and that I made a mistake and that like, oh, I blew it. I missed it. Okay, so that's a story. That's a spiritual story that is freaking me out. So there's my root. So there's the root of the discomfort. And what is yours? That I did this wrong or that I shouldn't have done the right. What's the story? What's the spiritual story within your consciousness that is propagating the emotion and then the physical reaction? So we're reverse engineering from the most crude level to the most refined. So we move through the levels of awareness. Now we found the story. All right. So there's this fear of missing out. Super uncomfortable. Okay. Fear of the unknown. And then you could even add layers to that. And then you could even dig deeper into this if you really wanted to add layers of your awareness of, and why is the fear of missing out such a problem? Go in deeper. Because then I worry I won't be taken care of. I'm worried that I did something wrong. I'm worried that I'm gonna like, I dropped the ball, never be able to get A, B, or C, right? There might be even more and more and more stories. Ultimately, you can trace all stories back to like, and then I'm gonna die, or then I'm gonna lose, and then I'm gonna, then I just suck. And it's like, it always goes back to this like dismal, like death scenario, basically. So you could technically keep tracing them all the way back to that. But the real core is just to know that it's coming from a deeper story. So it's not quite necessary to always have to go back to that, because you might kind of miss the point if you always take it back that far. But just be aware that that is the ultimate discomfort. That's why the ego thinks it has a right to do these coping mechanisms, is because it does think this is a matter of survival. which is its domain, right? So it is turning something like, what's funny is, it's turning like something someone said into a life or death scenario. But it's like, that was just a rude, judgmental remark that person said. But the ego's like, no, that was gonna make me die. And that's how this all works, is the ego takes our life experiences and turns them into existential moments. And that's why it feels justified to do its extreme coping mechanisms, its two versions. Because again, remember, the ego is the level of the animal. It's the level of survival. So we pull back with awareness. We've now discovered the story. Okay. So now we're going to look into that story and whatever that discomfort is coming up. Now, first and foremost from here, want to reiterate, we're just observing something. It's not who you are, you're just experiencing it. So it's there, it's uncomfortable, but we are technically watching it. We're talking about it, we're identifying it. We are creating layers of separation to it. This is where it's most important to remind you, when you're communicating this to others, like a partner or a friend or someone you're working through this with, a family member or something like that, it's powerful to always mention it as, this is arising within me, I'm noticing this, I'm observing it, somehow creating a layer of separation rather than like, I am afraid. Instead, or I am sad or I am depressed. Just be like, wow, I am just noticing all this like depression coming up. I'm just noticing all this fear of missing out coming up. It's like, wow, this is such a trip. You're just observing it. You're observing it within the human system. Okay, so we see it there. And now comes the truth. So here's how we're going to work through it. So we've identified it, which is already a monumental step, because that alone, most of us were never even taught how to do that. When our parents and all these people that we've encountered who did this to us, they didn't even know how to pass that along. So a lot of us, that alone might be a fantastic achievement to have learned how to go through those layers. But it keeps going, so this is really exciting. So it's like, wow, okay, I now know how to talk about my feelings. I know how to distill them to find out what is it really about. From there now, that we've identified and brought awareness to it, that's step one. So we've identified and brought awareness to it. Step two is we want to reaffirm unconditional love. So this is what I was saying about the separation thing. We want to realize this is just an experience of discomfort. It is not who I am. I am not sad. I am not afraid. I am not shameful. I am not guilty. I am not anger. Whatever your thing was, separate and reaffirm, wait a minute, I am unconditionally loved. I am pure. I am innocent. I am worthy. I am safe. I am secure. I am loved. I am wanted. I am pure. I am innocent. I am unconditionally loved. I am unconditionally loved, always and forever. It cannot ever be lost. Cannot ever be taken, cannot ever be lost. I am always loved, first and foremost. That is my innate being. It's my rock, my foundation. That is always the truth. Okay, so we come into that first. We reaffirm that energy. Hold on now, this isn't about us. I'm unconditionally loved. This is just an experience that my unconditionally loved beingness is going through and having. Two things, two separate things. Don't confuse this feeling with us. Don't confuse the feeling with who you are. So now that we've separated the two, now we can get into some healing with this feeling. We affirm unconditional love first, so that's step two. So we've identified it. We've moved into the unconditional love. Now we move into this story. What choice and consequence is connected to it? Now we're looking at the layer of wisdom. We're learning something. We're saying, okay, this story, this feeling I'm having, this discomfort is coming from the story I'm telling myself and also from a choice of a story or something I did that I am choosing to indulge in. And the consequence is all this discomfort. So when we look at choice and consequence, we have two layers of choices. Either an action we did, okay, so like with this fear of missing out, I did not take an action and now I am creating a story of regret. And so the action was not taken and now I am creating this story, which is the second layer of the choice. So you have two different types of choices that we make. It's either an action or it's a perspective. So in this case, something wasn't necessarily done to me, it's something I didn't do. But let's say something happened to me. Okay, this happened recently. Our water pump in our house randomly flooded the other day. So that is something that happened that I didn't necessarily do. I didn't like do any particular action that caused it. So that would be one of those examples of there's plenty of things, unfortunate things that will happen in life that will happen to you. They will happen. You didn't necessarily do anything to have it occur. On like a deep, super trippy philosophical level, we could get into that, but it's kind of irrelevant into our day-to-day practical use. Because you could always nitpick, well, you bought the house, and but that's not useful. The ego is just going to use that to get on our case. So you could take it to that level of extremity. You would still come out the other side with this process. It would still be fine. But for the most part, I want to really just kind of give you this permission to see it as there's these two kind of categories. You have things that will happen to you, and then there's things that you do, and they have very obvious choice and consequence involved. So when things happen, so the water pump breaks, and the room floods and all this stuff happens, I now have a choice of how am I going to show up to that. The choice is how am I going to perceive it. So I can choose, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Oh my gosh, this shouldn't happen. This is proof I'm cursed. This is proof there's something wrong with this house. Story. So I have all these choices that I can make of how am I going to view this. Or I could just be like, hey, no big deal. It just happens. Let's just fix it. Or, oh, wow, I'm being given an opportunity to like rise to the occasion and take care of my home and family. You name it. Anything is technically available. So in this moment, we actually have choice of how am I going to perceive this. So this is the second layer of choice. We have the ability to choose how we respond to things. We always have choice of how we respond to things. So the first layer is either a choice we're going to take action on or not. And then we have this, hello Grayson, or we have the choice to perceive things a certain way. So we have two layers of choice. So coming back to this discomfort, I see, okay, I'm unconditionally loved. This isn't about me, it's just an experience. It's a consequence. What is this a consequence of? What choice am I making, or did I make, that is creating this story and feeding it? And so in this case, with mine in particular, with the fear of missing out that I'm having, it's ultimately, here's something interesting you'll notice too. It's ultimately always that second one of perspective. Because first, you'll have a choice you either made or didn't make. So in this case, it's a choice I didn't make. Now, that was already its own consequence, but then what's creating the story is actually the choice I'm making of how am I perceiving that I didn't take that action. Because the action itself isn't what gave it the meaning. It's how I perceive not taking that action. So ultimately, it kind of always comes back to that, right? So just taking the action or not doing the action in and of itself is its own level of consequence. And if we just dealt with that as is, then there wouldn't be a story or emotion about it. It would just be like, well, I did that and now I'm dealing with it. But the story and the discomfort, that comes from how we're choosing to perceive it. So sitting in this own discomfort, coming back to it, identify what was the choice and the consequence. What choice did I make or not make? And what's the story I'm telling myself about that? So we either did or didn't do something, and now we're creating some sort of negative thing out of it. In this case, I have a story, for example, of, well, now I'm screwed, now I missed out, now I'll never have an opportunity again, now, right? So I've got the choice of how I'm perceiving not taking that action is being taken to a negative place. Instead of just saying, hey, well, it's okay. You didn't take that action, so what can you learn? How can you choose to see this constructively? And this is where you get more inventive and creative, and you say, okay, there are infinite other ways I could look at this. Yeah, I could come out of it being like, oh, I missed out and I'm just screwed and I just missed all those opportunities. But what's the consequence of that? The consequence is this discomfort stays there forever and it won't go away, because no matter what I do, it's just going to keep coming back. So this is where we have to realize that this is where our power comes from. It's our ability to view our choices and understand that how we choose to perceive them creates our own consequence internally. So I look at this choice in this particular sense, or in this particular one, I did something. I did something that had, I felt like I missed out on. Okay. Now I could choose to see this in many different ways, and I say, well, what can you learn from that? So this is the final piece. What wisdom can I gain from this? How can I grow? How can I see this discomfort as teaching me something, offering me something? And at bare minimum, it's teaching me to be aware of how I perceive things. So bare minimum, it's teaching me to choose a little more wisely, a little more carefully about how I perceive my mistakes. Are they even mistakes at all? And that's its bare minimum lesson. So discomfort is always trying to teach us, hey, you're straying from the truth. Because the truth is, you're always loved, you're always being guided, you're always learning, you're always growing, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So that's always the truth. So if we're not feeling that, like with this particular one, something's wrong, I shouldn't have done that, fear of missing out, or I'm really angry, I've been wronged, or no, I really am better than everybody else and I'm prideful, or oh, I'm ashamed, I'm worthless, or oh, I'm guilty, I deserve to be punished. Whatever it is, we want to bring it back and say, now hold on a minute. What was the choice? What was the consequence? What can I learn? So this discomfort is trying to lead us to the lesson. When I look at this particular one, I look at the lesson, I say, you know what? I made the best decision I could at the time. And I've learned, I could go on and on with a bunch of practical things with this particular feeling that I have. So on top of my head, I have a bunch of practical things I could say about this issue that I'm having. So I say, oh, it's cool, man. Matt, you're so loved, you're unconditionally loved. It's okay, you made this choice. It had these consequences. Don't make it worse by choosing to see that you did something even worse and failure and make it into something so much bigger. Instead, just be like, yeah, it's uncomfortable, you missed it this time. But let's just to sum it up simply, my practical solutions would be like, hey, no big deal. You'll just get it next time. Just be more aware next time. And for what it's worth, though, I do have multiple other things I could say. And so what you want to do is be solution and learning oriented on this final step of, hey, it's all good because you're unconditionally loved. So now that your love and worth is solid and can't be touched or tainted or taken from you, what can you learn from it? And at bare minimum, choose to see it in a more constructive way. Because the consequence of choosing to see it as, it was just an experience, you're just learning, that won't carry all the discomfort. Because remember, the discomfort is coming from the choice, not the actual thing. So this is the final piece. We now sit with that and we say, okay, I'm going to choose. I see the choices that I made. I see their consequences. I see how they're making me feel. What can I learn? How can I do this differently moving forward and starting right now? And then next time, if I have another opportunity that's similar to this, I'll take this lesson because I'm sitting with this discomfort. Here's the irony with learning. We tend to not learn lessons because we escape the discomfort. We never learn the lesson because the discomfort is trying to teach us something. And if we escape it too quickly, the lesson never gets assimilated into our consciousness because we basically push the lesson away. We either project it elsewhere or we mask it and we repress it, we push it down, we don't ever acknowledge it. So by doing this process of sitting with this discomfort, you should come out of the discomfort with a wisdom. And that wisdom is going to make you feel empowered through the discomfort rather than defeated by it. You're going to come out of it stronger, wiser, and smarter and ready for next time. So sit with that wisdom you've gained and just notice that first. All right, I've learned this. I see how I can do this better next time, and I will try that next time, and it's not a big deal. I'm totally loved. I'm forgiven. I have access to infinite compassion and forgiveness. It's all good. I'm unconditionally loved. I'm unconditionally loved. I've gained this wisdom, and now I know moving forward. Breathe into that wisdom, embracing that wisdom, and just holding on to that first. And then with that wisdom there, we want to now apply it here and now. So this is acknowledging, okay, in the future, this is what I'm going to do. I'm aware of it. Thank you for this wisdom. I see this. Now we want to acknowledge the discomfort that is currently here, and we want to say, okay, I'm going to choose to see this differently. I know how uncomfortable this is. I see what created it. Breathing, keep breathing through it. But I'm going to choose to see this in a new way. And in so doing, I release this discomfort and I allow it to pass. I allow it to be there knowing that it won't last forever. I choose to see that it doesn't have to stay this way. It only stays this way if we don't learn the lesson, if we don't choose differently. So think of it though as just because you're applying this method and you're seeing it differently, it might not stop immediately. It's kind of like a freight train. The emotional wave has to run its course. It has to slowly come to a stop. It has to play itself out. But from here on, the discomfort shouldn't be controlling us anymore because we sat with it for so long. We've taken the wisdom from it, and it's now just kind of crashing on the shore. It's just kind of finishing its course. It's the train coming to a stop, and it will pass. I can guarantee you that. Sometimes it can be very quick. Sometimes it's like right now. It's like, okay, I feel so much better now that I see that clearly. Sometimes it will take a few minutes. Maybe it's the rest of the day. At most, it's like several days. It's very uncommon. If it's several days, I would say keep sitting with it because maybe you're not getting it all the way. Maybe there's more there for you to keep looking at. But I can promise you, I've been through some of the most heavy, dark feelings. And once I've done this method and worked through them, they will usually pass within the day. Usually, especially by the next morning. Okay, so it shouldn't sit for too long. If it does, keep looking, keep diving in, keep exploring what's here, what's the lesson, what am I not choosing differently, what am I not seeing? And applying that now, and now letting that new choice be the new path. We've sat with the discomfort, we've learned the lesson, we're choosing differently, and now we just watch the experience pass because we know it's not who we are. We just let it keep on rolling now. So let the feeling dissipate, let it move through us, and just move forward very confidently, applying the new choice. I'm choosing to see it this way. I'm choosing to do this now, moving forward. And that is the highest level of wisdom for how to sit with discomfort and to leave it wiser, stronger, and more empowered. I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions. Namaste.